Inflation is the number one issue that Republicans are running on ahead of the midterm elections, and they have been driving that message home in all of their debates.
If elected, what is one idea that you would champion to reduce inflation? We ask you to be specific. You have 60 seconds.
Well, first of all, you have to blame this administration and Senator Warnock because within 2 years, this inflation has gotten worse.
The problem people are having is the out-of-control inflation caused by out-of-control deficit spending, our growing debt, and Democrats' war on fossil fuel.
We should be talking about crime and inflation, the issues that are hurting Pennsylvanians that they're talking about at their kitchen table.
It's the massive, crushing inflation that Joe Biden and Mark Kelly caused. And it's their fault. They caused it.
Now, this is just politics 101. It's very easy for Republicans to talk about inflation, and if I were advising Republican candidates, I'd tell them to do the same thing. But here's the thing. There's almost zero coverage of what Republicans plan to do to fight inflation. Like, does Herschel Walker or Blake Masters have even a minimally plausible agenda to address the number one economic issue they are running on? And I think the answer is no. Joining me now is Michael Strain. He previously worked for the Center for Economic Studies, the U.S. Census Bureau, and in the Macroeconomics Research Group at the Federal Reserve Bank in New York, now the Director of Economic Policy at the American Enterprise Institute, which is a conservative think tank, and it's good to have you here, Michael.
It's good to be here.
You and I think, probably have different views on the economy in some ways, and politics and different traditions we come out of. But it was interesting to me to see your quote in that New York Times article today on this. Do you think a Republican House has a plan to combat inflation?
I think that the Republican candidates are right to point out that the American Rescue Plan contributed a significant amount to the inflation we've experienced. I think that's a reasonable, valid concern in an election. But I don't think that there's a whole lot that Republicans, should they take the House, or even if they took both the House and the Senate, could do to really affect inflation in 2023, when it's still going to be higher than the Fed's target, when it's still going to be causing problems for American households and for American families.
Yeah, there's not even like a plausible lever to me.
Yeah.
Like, there's not even a story they're telling that you could see. I guess we're going to reduce deficits or austerity.
Yeah, I mean, I think one plausible lever. So, step back. Who's responsible for fixing inflation? The Fed. What is the role of Congress? What's the role of the president in a situation like this? I think rule number one is do no harm.
Right.
Rule number two is pick low-hanging fruit.
Right.
And so I think President Biden has violated both rules. Student debt forgiveness is going to add to inflation. Pick low-hanging fruit. I think the president should be rolling back the Trump-era tariffs on Chinese imports. We'll probably do a little bit to help.
That one I think we agree on.
Yeah. So a Republican Congress might be able to help enforce rule number one, might be able to influence rule number two.
But in terms of prices.
It would if there were another American Rescue. So if we were in recession in 2023 or a mild recession, if the president wanted to pass a big stimulus, kind of similar to the American Rescue Plan, maybe half the size, something like that, driven by the progressive wing of the party, I think that Republicans could plausibly argue if we were in charge, that wouldn't happen, and therefore inflation wouldn't get worse. Right. But you're right that not making a problem worse is different than making a problem better.
Well, and also let's show the global comparative situation here, because I do think that we've gotten a little detached to this, and I think this actually bears a bit on this question of the American Rescue Plan, which again, Republicans tell this story. The American Rescue Plan was inflationary. Larry Summers made the argument. I don't think it's a ludicrous story at all, and you could tell a plausible story about it. But when we look and we see where we are, where we stack up, the UK has higher inflation. Germany is not exactly hammer on the printing press. They're one of the most fiscally conservative nations on earth, right? 10% inflation. Spain and Italy much higher. So what is happening here is being driven largely by factors outside of whatever Joe Biden did.
Yeah, it's complicated. So I think it's helpful to kind of break up the story into two parts, 2021 and 2022. Yep. In 2021, the American Rescue Plan fueled a lot of inflation by pushing the demand side of the economy further than the supply side of the economy could handle. And the United States had significantly higher inflation than the countries that you listed. Then Russia invaded Ukraine.
And the energy prices went
berserk.
But this is a perfect example, right? Because the way the politics work, it's like you can run for office in Germany and you can say, these fuel prices are out of control.
Sure.
And it's the easiest thing in the world. What are you going to do to bring fuel prices down tomorrow is a whole other question.
Yeah.
The point is that identifying the problem is 100 times easier than solving it, particularly when it is either a supply-driven issue coming from the fossil fuel factor and the worst war on the European continent since, Yugoslavia, or when it's basically this sort of like enduring and lingering after effects of the, of COVID.
Yeah, I think pointing out the problem and assigning blame is a totally reasonable thing for politicians to do.
Sure.
If Republicans want to say, give us control of Congress and we won't let President Biden make the situation worse,
right.
Also reasonable. But I don't think that they have a proactive plan to lower the rate of consumer price increases in 2023.
Final question is, what do you think about the debt ceiling and a standoff over that in terms of what it would do to general macroeconomic health and stability?
Well, I think it would be terrible, reckless, irresponsible. It could be, a catastrophe, depending on how long the standoff lasted, depending on whether or not global investors actually thought there was a risk that the United States wouldn't pay its bills. But the best case scenario is reckless, irresponsible damage and increases in borrowing costs.
All right, Michael Strange, good to have you here. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.